When Helen first noticed her 78-year-old father sitting quietly by the window for hours, watching the birds instead of tending to his beloved garden, she dismissed it as a seasonal change. After all, winter was approaching, and who wants to dig in cold soil? But as weeks turned into months, she began to see other shifts, small moments that whispered of something deeper than just getting older. The truth is, recognizing when our loved ones may be entering their final chapter isn't about doom and gloom. It's about understanding, preparation, and honoring the profound journey of aging gracefully. For families navigating life after 60 with aging parents or grandparents, these subtle signs can mean the difference between feeling blindsided and feeling prepared to offer the right kind of love and support. Senior empowerment doesn't just mean staying active and independent. It also means facing life's transitions with dignity and emotional wisdom. Sometimes the most empowering thing we can do is acknowledge when someone we love is beginning to slow down in ways that go beyond typical aging. These aren't necessarily medical emergencies or dramatic changes. Instead, they're gentle shifts that speak to the natural rhythm of a life well lived. Many families miss these early indicators because they're focused on maintaining independent living at all costs, which is understandable. We want our elderly loved ones to stay vibrant, engaged, and self-sufficient for as long as possible. But emotional wisdom teaches us that there's a difference between supporting independence and ignoring the signs that someone may need a different kind of care and attention. The 5 signs we're about to explore aren't meant to cause panic or sadness. Rather, they're invitations to deepen our connection, to have meaningful conversations, and to ensure that our loved ones feel seen, valued, and supported during whatever time remains. These indicators often emerge quietly: a gradual loss of interest in favorite activities, changes in social patterns, or subtle shifts in how someone relates to their own life story. What makes these signs particularly important is that they're often accompanied by a kind of peaceful acceptance that family members might not immediately recognize. It's not depression or giving up, it's something more profound. It's the emotional wisdom that comes with a long life, a natural turning inward that deserves our respect and understanding. Helen's story, which we'll return to throughout this discussion, illustrates how these changes can unfold gradually within the context of someone who has lived independently and purposefully well into their later years. Her father wasn't sick in any obvious way, but something fundamental was shifting in how he engaged with the world around him. Understanding these signs isn't about predicting timelines or making medical diagnoses. It's about recognizing when our approach to caring for elderly family members might need to evolve. It's about honoring the journey of aging while ensuring we don't miss opportunities for deeper connection and meaningful support. So what were the subtle changes that Helen began to notice in her father? And more importantly, what did they really mean for their family's journey together? To understand the significance of what Helen was witnessing, we need to step back and look at who her father, Robert, had been throughout his life after retirement. For 15 years, he had embodied everything families hope for in senior reflection. He volunteered at the local library, maintained a vegetable garden that supplied half the neighborhood, and took daily walks that kept him healthier than men 20 years younger. His emotional resilience had carried him through the loss of his wife 3 years earlier, and he had surprised everyone, including himself, by finding purpose in small daily rituals and new friendships at the community center. Robert's story wasn't unique in its struggles, but it was remarkable in how he had navigated each transition. When forced retirement first arrived at 65, he had gone through the typical adjustment period that many seniors face: a sense of lost identity, questions about relevance, and the challenge of structuring days that had been organized by decades of work routines. But unlike many of his peers, Robert had embraced this new chapter with curiosity rather than resignation. He had discovered that life after retirement could hold unexpected gifts. The garden became his meditation, each tomato plant a small victory against the passage of time. His weekly volunteering sessions turned into genuine friendships with librarians and fellow volunteers who saw him not as an elderly man filling time, but as someone with wisdom to share and stories worth hearing. When Helen's mother passed away suddenly, Robert's world could have collapsed entirely. Instead, he demonstrated the kind of emotional resilience that comes from years of facing life's challenges head-on. The community center became his lifeline during those difficult months of grief. Not because he needed constant company, but because he had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. He would sit with other widows and widowers, sharing stories that honored their departed spouses while slowly learning to live as individuals again. His senior reflection during this period wasn't bitter or regretful. It was grateful and purposeful. Helen had watched her father navigate these transitions with a mixture of admiration and relief. Here was a man who had found his footing in later life, who had proven that aging didn't mean becoming irrelevant or dependent. His independence wasn't just about living in his own home or managing his own affairs. It was about maintaining his sense of self and continuing to contribute meaningfully to the world around him. But something had shifted in recent months, and Helen couldn't quite put her finger on what it was. The garden tools sat unused in the shed, not because winter had arrived, but because Robert seemed to have lost interest in planning for spring. His volunteer schedule, once sacred, had become sporadic. He still attended, but his enthusiasm had dimmed. The daily walks continued, but they had become shorter and more contemplative. Most troubling of all, Robert had begun talking about his life in a way that suggested he was reviewing rather than living it. The shift became undeniable during Helen's weekly Sunday visits. Instead of sharing updates about his current activities or plans for the week ahead, Robert had started telling stories from decades past with a new kind of intensity. He would describe his first job, his courtship with Helen's mother, or moments from Helen's childhood with vivid detail, as if he were carefully cataloging memories that might otherwise slip away. These weren't the casual reminiscences of someone enjoying nostalgia. They carried the weight of someone making peace with his past. Helen found herself caught between honoring her father's autonomy and acknowledging what her instincts were telling her. The late-life choices he was making seemed to point toward a quiet withdrawal from the world. But how could she address this without undermining the very independence he had fought so hard to maintain? Family dynamics had always been straightforward in their household. Robert had raised Helen to be self-reliant and to respect others' decisions, even when she disagreed with them. Now those same values were creating an impossible situation. The turning point came on a cold February afternoon when Helen arrived to find Robert sitting in his favorite armchair, surrounded by photo albums and old letters that he hadn't looked at in years. He wasn't organizing them or putting them away. He was simply holding them one by one with the careful attention of someone saying goodbye. When she asked about his plans for the upcoming week, he looked at her with a smile that was both peaceful and heartbreaking. "You know, sweetheart," he said, "I've been thinking about how grateful I am for the life I've had. Really grateful." The way he emphasized the past tense sent a chill through Helen that had nothing to do with the winter weather outside. This wasn't depression speaking, nor was it the confusion of cognitive decline. This was something else entirely, a kind of spiritual preparation that she recognized but didn't want to acknowledge. Robert's approach to aging with dignity had always included accepting life's natural rhythms. But Helen wondered if he was moving too quickly toward acceptance of something she wasn't ready to face. The man who had once planned garden layouts months in advance was now speaking as if he were wrapping up loose ends. His conversations had taken on the quality of someone offering final thoughts, rather than exploring new possibilities. The most challenging aspect of watching these changes was that Robert seemed more at peace than he had been in years, even as Helen felt increasingly anxious about what his tranquility might mean. He had stopped making long-term commitments, declining invitations to events more than a few weeks away with gentle excuses that didn't quite ring true. When Helen suggested they plan a spring trip together, something they'd talked about doing for years, Robert's response revealed the depth of the chasm that was opening between them. His pause was longer than it should have been, and when he finally answered, Helen realized that everything she thought she understood about her father's journey was about to change forever. "Actually, Helen," Robert said quietly, setting down a faded photograph of himself as a young man, "there's something I need to tell you, something I've been carrying for a very long time." The weight in his voice suggested this wasn't about spring travel plans anymore. Helen felt her stomach tighten as she recognized the tone. It was the same one he had used years ago when he told her about her mother's diagnosis. What Robert revealed next transformed everything Helen thought she knew about her father's recent behavior. Hidden in the stack of old letters was correspondence from a brother Helen never knew existed, Robert's twin, who had been given up for adoption when they were infants during the Great Depression. The letters, yellowed with age, told the story of a man named William who had spent 70 years searching for his biological family, finally locating Robert through genealogy websites just 6 months earlier. The two brothers had been exchanging letters and phone calls throughout the winter, carefully rebuilding a relationship that had been severed before either of them could form memories of each other. Robert's withdrawal from his usual activities hadn't been preparation for ending. It had been preparation for something entirely different. William, now battling his own health challenges, had expressed a desire to meet his twin brother face to face before it was too late for either of them. This rediscovery after 60 had sent Robert into a profound period of reflection about identity, family, and the roads not taken. The man Helen had watched sitting quietly by the window hadn't been withdrawing from life. He had been processing the overwhelming reality that he wasn't who he thought he was. The careful review of photographs and memories had been his way of integrating this new understanding of his past with the life he had built. "I didn't know how to tell you," Robert continued, his voice trembling slightly. "William wants to come visit, to meet you too. He has children, grandchildren. We have family we never knew about." The peaceful acceptance Helen had interpreted as preparation for death was actually preparation for new beginnings, the kind of second chapter that rarely comes to people in their late 70s. Robert's recent changes had been the emotional processing of someone grappling with a fundamental shift in identity. The conversations about gratitude weren't farewell speeches. They were the words of a man amazed by life's capacity for surprise. His reluctance to make long-term plans hadn't been about sensing his mortality, but about holding space for possibilities he couldn't have imagined. The irony wasn't lost on Helen. She had been preparing herself for loss while her father was actually preparing for the most significant gain of his lifetime. The healing family bonds she thought were being severed were actually multiplying in ways that defied everything she understood about typical family narratives. But as Robert reached for another envelope, one marked with more recent postmarks, Helen sensed that this revelation was only the beginning of what her father needed to share. The second envelope contained medical records that made Helen's breath catch. William wasn't just reaching out for emotional connection. He was facing a serious heart condition that required surgery, and he had no family nearby to help him through recovery. The brothers had discovered each other just as one of them needed family most desperately. Robert's careful contemplation hadn't been about his own mortality, but about whether he was strong enough to be the brother William had never had when it mattered most. "I've been scared, Helen," Robert admitted, his voice breaking slightly. "Not of dying, but of not being enough. William needs someone, and I'm 78 years old. What if I can't be there for him the way he deserves?" This was the real source of his withdrawal. Not preparation for his own ending, but the overwhelming responsibility of becoming someone's most important person at a stage of life when most people are scaling back commitments. The wisdom with age that Helen had always admired in her father was now being tested in ways neither of them had anticipated. Robert had spent months weighing whether inviting William into their lives was fair to anyone involved. He worried about the impact on Helen, about his own physical limitations, and about raising hopes that his aging body might not be able to fulfill. The emotional closure he sought wasn't about his past, but about finding the courage to embrace an unexpected future. Helen felt something shift inside her as she watched her father struggle with this profound decision. The man she had been worrying about losing was actually grappling with how much more he could give. Her perspective flipped completely as she realized that Robert's recent behavior hadn't been about giving up. It had been about gathering strength for the most important relationship of his remaining years. "Dad," Helen said softly, reaching for his hand, "you've been alone with this for months. You don't have to carry it by yourself." The moment she spoke those words, she saw her father's shoulders relax for the first time in weeks. The burden he had been carrying wasn't just about William. It was about feeling isolated in a decision that would affect everyone he loved. What happened next became a life's turning point after 60 that none of them could have predicted. Instead of the gradual decline Helen had feared, or even the simple reunion Robert had imagined, they were about to embark on a journey that would redefine what family meant for all of them. Robert's quiet strength had been preparing not for an ending, but for the most challenging and meaningful chapter of his life. The 5 signs Helen had been interpreting as warnings were actually the quiet preparation of a man getting ready to love again in ways he never thought possible. But the real surprise was still to come, hidden in what William's arrival would reveal about the nature of family itself. 3 months later, Helen stood in her kitchen preparing dinner for 4 instead of 2, watching her father and his twin brother William collaborate on setting the table with the careful coordination of people who had spent a lifetime apart, but somehow moved in rhythm. William's surgery had been successful, and his recovery in Robert's home had transformed both men in ways that defied every assumption about what it means to age gracefully. The house that had felt too quiet for one man now buzzed with the gentle energy of 2 people discovering shared memories they never knew they had. William's stories filled in gaps in Robert's understanding of his own childhood, while Robert's steady presence gave William the family anchor he had searched for his entire life. Their conversations carried the unique intimacy of people who shared everything and nothing, who were strangers and identical all at once. Helen had learned something profound about senior resilience during those months of watching her father navigate this unexpected chapter. The qualities she had interpreted as signs of decline, the introspection, the careful review of life, the stepping back from familiar routines, had actually been signs of someone preparing to expand rather than contract. Robert's wisdom hadn't been about accepting limitations, but about recognizing possibilities that required different kinds of strength. The timeless lessons that emerged from their experience challenged everything Helen thought she knew about aging and family. She had discovered that the capacity for love and growth doesn't diminish with age. It simply changes form, becoming more intentional and precious because time itself has become more valuable. Her father's quiet contemplation had been the work of someone preparing to make room for more life, not less. What struck Helen most deeply was how Robert's apparent withdrawal had actually been a form of spiritual preparation for service. The man she had worried was giving up had been gathering the emotional resources necessary to become someone's primary support system at an age when most people are learning to accept help rather than give it. This was senior resilience in its purest form, the ability to reinvent purpose when life presents unexpected opportunities. As the 4 of them sat around the dinner table that evening, sharing stories and making plans for William's permanent move to their town, Helen realized that the 5 signs she had been so concerned about were universal experiences that many families misinterpret. The quiet reflection, the stepping back from routine activities, the intense focus on relationships and memories, the sense of wrapping up old chapters, and the subtle withdrawal from future planning. These behaviors might indeed signal someone's preparation for life's final transition, but they might also signal preparation for life's most meaningful transitions. Robert's journey had taught them all that life's quiet victories often look like defeats from the outside, and that the courage to love deeply never expires, regardless of age.